So, could you introduce yourself and what your role at Microsoft is?
So I'm Jason Zander. I'm the Corporate Vice President of Visual Studio, so I run the engineering team.
Cool. What to you are the biggest changes in Visual Studio, both technically and from a business change point of view?
So I think the biggest thing from a technical standpoint, we've added a bunch of new platform support. In particular, Windows 8 added a bunch of new functionality to handle that brand new platform, really exciting. The other thing we did is we really spent a significant amount of time kind of tripling down on agile practices and putting those directly into the products. The industry's moving there, we're moving there, we're actually there already. So those were significant changes for this particular release.
And how is touch development enabled within Visual Studio, and how does that fit with the Windows 8 larger things?
Yeah. Touch is actually a significant portion of new applications. So modern applications that people write, most of us are traveling around with probably 3 screens in our bags or in our pockets, between a phone, some kind of tablet, maybe an Ultrabook, or take your pick. Touch is something that's coming to all of those. It's actually there already. Our new generation of programmers and users coming out will not know an environment where they didn't have a touchscreen someplace. So we want to make sure we do a first-class job with that. Windows 8, Windows Phone, it built operating systems to do a fantastic job making that first-class part of what you're doing. So with Visual Studio, what we've done is made it very easy for you to go in, build those sort of applications in the environment. We've added design points with expression, which allows me to actually do visual design for that. I can also debug those events like I normally would be able to do. But another cool thing about Windows 8 is we have a simulator that's built into the product. So even if you don't have a touch device that you're doing development on, you can actually use your mouse and you can interface with it and basically simulate having a touch, stretch, those sorts of metaphors, and be able to use the application that way. Now I can debug, see what it looks like, and I can also go off to the main device and go try the same thing.
And as I remember, you also had something in there around being able to stop and start during compilation. When you're doing coding, sitting down and actually debugging the code whilst it's actually running. Is that right?
Yes. Well, sure. We've always had that though. So the debugger basically makes this really simple to go do because I can obviously debug the application any way that I want. If I add touched events into the application, I can stop on those and see what that looks like. The simulator is a brand new functionality, and that one again allows me to simulate what it's like to have touch interface without actually having a touch device, which I think is helpful for developers.
What surprised you about the development of Visual Studio 2012?
Well, the cool thing about this release is we've actually used half the number of milestones than we did for Visual Studio 2010. And a lot of that is we used the product to build the product, and all the implementation we did around Agile, we picked that up and used that directly ourselves, which has been a really significant boost for us. So just from that perspective, we actually added much more functionality than we have in the past. But we did it with half the milestones and nailed all of those milestones. So it was actually, I knew it was going to work pretty well because it was why we were building the functionality. But to the extent of how effective it was for the team, that was a pleasant surprise. It was, just really, really effective. So we definitely want to make sure that we're sharing those lessons with other developers, so hopefully they can do the same thing.
Do you mind me asking how many developers and how many milestones they actually got through?
We have about 1,500 engineering people that work across Visual Studio, .NET Framework, JavaScript, all of those sort of content. It's a significant number of people to coordinate. From a milestone perspective, like I mentioned last time, we had a beta 1, we had a beta 2, we had an RC, we had kind of preview RCs and RTMs. In this particular case, we just had a beta. We had a release candidate, and then we went right to RTM. So basically just 3 milestones by the time we were done.
And what was the biggest pain point when you were developing Visual Studio 2012, and how did the team overcome this?
So I think the biggest thing for us was we made a significant investment in performance for this release. It was something where we had gotten feedback from Visual Studio 2010. We spent a bunch of time looking at that feedback. We wanted to make sure that we made a very concrete change to that. Now, in this particular case, it really did require a significant investment of new resources around the core engineering system. So we created a new dedicated performance team, put those in place, and then we really had to go through the entire system, add tracing, instrumentation, and those sorts of things. And it's a significant amount of work because it's a very large code base. That said, as the product got out there, we've gotten a lot of just organic feedback that people are just really happy that it's much snappier, it's faster, and it's easier to use. So I think that part has kind of paid off.
And what achievements are you most proud of?
I would say for this release, really being able to, from the core engineering perspective, as I mentioned, being able to do this much new functionality, this quickly with predictability, that's something, having been at Microsoft for 20 years, it takes a long time to kind of build up, and especially at this kind of scale. So I'm actually very proud for the team that we were able to hit that with those milestones, nail every one of them. And we didn't wind up, way off on nights and weekends and that kind of stuff for months on end, which we have in the past. So.
What process happens when you're developing an application like Visual Studio, maybe starting with techniques?
So we use a combination of waterfall and also agile practices like Scrum. And from a top level perspective, I think that makes sense. Anyone who is running a large team or a group of teams that have to come together will recognize this problem. I have concrete milestones. They might be every 6 months. Maybe it's a project that has to be done after a year. Those are long periods of time. And at that point, I do need to be able to break those up into very large chunks. So we were able to accomplish that. In our case, that's beta, that's RC, and then RTM. So 3 major milestones with varying lengths inside of that. But within that, we actually then break it down. So featured teams that go through and own particular features that have been implemented, they are actually using Scrum. And they're generally working in anywhere from 2 to 4 week sprints as a unit. They know they just have to be able to sync up with the major synchronization points at the top level. So we've been able to use that sort of a process, which, like I said, the biggest thing for me that it's helped us with is the predictability. Because when you're using the sprint model, you're less tempted to accrue debt without realizing it. And historically, what would happen is people would wind up coding significant amount of work, not realizing they had a bunch of test debt, performance debt, those sorts of things. And the slips always come from you think you're about done, and then you actually start using it, and it's like, wow, I'm not actually close to done, then all of a sudden you had time. So this predictability and not accruing debt really made a significant difference for the release.
Cool. And how about with the technologies that you use to be able to make this happen?
So I think the big thing, like I mentioned, is we actually use the software to build the software, and we'll make sure that we use it ourselves before we actually ship it to customers. So from a technology perspective, we started off using the traditional Post-it notes on the wall. So this is something that moves to in progress, it's going to move to done, no matter which process you're using. By the time we got halfway through, we actually had our task boards and backlog material already built out. Team Foundation Server supported it. So teams were able to start moving over and getting rid of the paper and moving over to the electronic version, and all the way out to big touch screens where I can drag items back and forth. And so that's basically where we landed.
And how about with the features that were being created? How did you manage the quantity of features?
Yeah, it's a significant amount when you think about it. You put 1,500 people on a product like this, and then all the partnerships, and at the same time that we're doing Windows development, we're also working on phone, we're working on Windows Azure, we're working on SharePoint and Office tools, and they all ship on different cadences. So we actually have teams that are dedicated to tracking individual platform releases and making sure those are going, as well as the core and pulling those together. And so it takes a significant amount of coordination to pull those folks together. We do use Team Foundation Server, or TFS, for that. Program management will come off the top level. Every milestone, we have the top level requirements that are, this is what the milestone must do, the level of functionality. Those get broken down into smaller things, all the way down to stories and then down to tasks. And at that point, we just use a backlog system in order to figure out the order in which things are going to happen. They get broken up to sprints, they start to accrue up, and then we use TFS itself for branching across all of these source codes. We have millions of lines of source code. And then we did a lot of work to improve code flow in those systems so that teams could get other teams' changes, and that way dependencies were met, that sort of thing. So it's actually a significant undertaking, but the tools are getting so good now, it makes it significantly easier to get it done.
And having Microsoft being such a large organization, how do you utilize that for testing and for development? So
we have full-time professional testers, some of the best in the world. They're fantastic. So they actually will go through and do all the first round of quality and testing and that kind of thing. Because we are a software development company, though, the cool thing is once I get out to betas and those sorts of releases, I can release them internally, send out mail to the company, and I can get people all over the company, people in Xbox, people in Office and Windows. They will go ahead and pick up the new builds, install them internally, and start playing around with them. So we get a lot of good feedback, and they're pretty demanding. So if they find stuff they don't like, I'm going to hear about it.
And how do you motivate your development teams to perform so well?
Well, I think the teams love to deliver cool stuff, right? They like working on hard problems. They like working with people that are fun to work with, smart people, and they like to solve customer problems. And so generally what I've found is once you get a product out there, people are proud of what they built. They want to hear what customers have to say. There's nothing more validating than seeing a stream of tweets come in and saying, hey, wow, this is a lot faster, this is working better. If you're on the performance team, you're like high-fiving down the hallway because it's like, awesome, people really love that. It took me 6 months, but they're excited about that. So I generally find when people see that connection and see customers happy with that, developers get excited about what they're working on and they want to work that much harder on the rest of it.
How do you manage the ever-changing and increasing amount of feedback to end up with a comprehensive set of user requirements, and how on earth do you prioritize those?
We get a significant amount of feedback, which is kind of good. We got a lot of feedback on the UI this time around. In fact, I'm still getting feedback on the UI, and we're done. But we use a number of techniques for that. We do actually pay attention on social media, and so I very typically will wind up blogging things that are new changes or functionality. The Visual Studio Team blog is another forum where we use for that kind of content. There, what we try and do is go through and not only explain what the new features are, but also why did we build them, what was the motivation for how they were built, because there is a lot of thinking that goes into it. Even if somebody looks at it and says, I really don't like that, you should not have done that, please turn it off. There is almost always a very good set of reasons why we've done that, even if we may agree to disagree. Once the feedback starts coming through, we get a lot of stuff through social media. So we look at Twitter, we look at our blog entries and the comments that come through on that. We also have formalized techniques. The Connect site is a fantastic example of that. User voice, where people can register, hey, I really don't like this, and other people can vote. We do look through all of those, and we still have to intersect it with where we're taking the product, and usually we try very hard to take that feedback into account. And sometimes we may have a strategic direction. The user interface is a good example. There's a lot of folks that looked at it and said, I don't like it. And yet, hopefully, as people now see Office 2013 and the new look that's come out there, they'll actually see we're actually quite similar in these two desktop applications, Office 13, Visual Studio 2012. We are sharing a lot of the same look and feel. And that is intentional. And that was something we had already had designed. Sometimes I'm just not able to describe that that's what we're doing because another product hasn't shipped yet. But I think that you will at least see consistency.
I understand that you're using agile integration techniques. Why did you adopt this, and how does this fit with Visual Studio's end product with the features?
Yeah, the neat thing about agile is it is something that the entire industry, basically has moved to or is in the process of moving to. It's not necessarily new per se, but I'd say that the level at which it's being adopted mainstream has shot up significantly in the last couple of years. It's one of the reasons why we wanted to make sure we had absolutely first-class support in the product for it. The big thing to me around Agile, again, is it helps you avoid accruing debt. It's kind of the example I gave before, which is if I just code, then I have to fix, and then all of a sudden my milestones just keep going out. And so actually breaking things up into smaller units and being able to see where you're at, and then doing retrospectives where I look back, like how did the last 3 weeks go and what would I change next time? It makes sure that you never quite get off course, and if you do find a problem, you can pivot and go get that fixed. As an engineering manager, it's a little disconcerting because your team can't tell you precisely what's going to get done because they need to figure out what their velocity looks like. I find if you make that leap, especially if you're running teams as opposed to being in a team, once you make the leap and the team gets going, it's kind of a slow down to speed up. It's actually slower the first couple of sprints while the team tries to get it. Once they figure it out, they actually speed up significantly. And I've seen teams that are just so much more productive than I've ever seen them before.
What were the common issues that people had when they first started to learn about the techniques, and how did you guys overcome that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the thing is, it's pretty easy to look at industry and say, well, everybody seems to be doing Scrum or other Agile practices, so that must just be the magic way to get stuff done. Of course it's not. There's never any magic. It's a combination of common sense and those sort of things. The pitfalls I usually see, we generally tell a team once they start using Scrum within their group, that you basically need to assume the first 3 sprints are useless, right? You're going to do it for the first 3 times, and you're going to find out that nobody knows what they're doing. They don't understand what their roles are. They get not as much done as you would have thought. They have to go back and retry it. This is mostly, I think, of as kind of like training. Like if I was going to train for a marathon, I don't just put somebody at the start line they've never run before and say, go, I'll see you in 26 miles. 26.2. Like, no, you don't do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, you actually take people out and say, well, here's how you do it, and get them kind of conditioned to try it out. So you need to think of the first couple of sprints exactly that way. Once people get going, then you wind up being able to do it. Another pitfall that I've seen, we did suffer from this ourselves. Doing Agile is not the equivalent to being random. And I've seen people that criticize the approach and say, it just seems like you guys don't know what you're doing, right? You're running around, you're just doing whatever, throwing stuff at the wall. That's actually a less disciplined version. And so we actually did make some mistakes where I did have people that just came in and they said, well, you know, we tried it out, now we're going to refactor, and they keep using milestone after milestone. It's like, you know, guys, what you should do instead is go use a sprint for planning. Like, if it's a really significantly complicated piece, use a sprint for planning out what the architectural approach is going to be, and then use the sprints after that to implement it, and then reserve the right to pivot if you don't get it correct. So, you know, you don't have to be, you know, random. I've seen those sort of things. So, yep, I've seen both of those problems.
What can developers, project managers, and CIOs learn from Microsoft's approaches to software development, do you think?
Well, I think when you think about what we are generally doing, we're shipping software which has tens of millions of lines of code in it. It's all getting updated, and we're shipping it at approximately a 2-year cadence, right? I mean, not 100% the same thing. I'm shipping deliverables into a major platform like Windows 8, but like I mentioned before, also doing cloud, doing phone, doing whatever those Office. These are huge, huge environments, and they have their own ship schedules. So, from my perspective, as I go out and talk to CIOs and engineering managers around the world in large enterprises, they look at the scale that we're doing stuff, and they either recognize that, yeah, that's kind of similar to what I'm doing, or wow, I've got 100 small projects that I'm trying to pull together. So if you look at it from that perspective, if we can scale to that level, then I think we've got a good system that will help you, especially if you're not actually trying to scale precisely that high. For example, we manage a TFS database that is about 17 terabytes by the time we're done. Right, so 2 years of development adds up quite a bit, right? So, coordinating that many people. So I think if we can come in, nail these milestones, use these techniques, use the tools to go off and go do that, there should be something you can find that you recognize saying, yeah, for my team, I can totally see how it's going to work.
Do you think these things can scale down to the individual kind of smaller companies in such a way that Microsoft can do?
Absolutely, things can scale down. In fact, I actually use TFS for my projects on the weekend. I use the hosted version online, which is really easy. So, and it's all hooked up, and I can write my own applications. I'd say that the sweet spot, if you're doing team development, individuals can absolutely use it, but you get 5 people, 10 people, it's still perfect for that. Because when you think about it, the feature teams that are using Sprint, a sprint model, there typically are somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 30 people. So they are kind of smaller sort of teams. And in that perspective, like the team working on the debugger, it's just a team. There's people on the compiler, people on the IDE, and it's a breadth of teams, but then it's the integration of them coming together that equals the product. So you can absolutely scale it down, and if you never have the need to pull together 40 million lines of code and do a build overnight, you don't have to do that. But it can.
And where do you see the future direction of Visual Studio going?
So I see us doing a lot more around the kind of online and services sort of area. We've introduced Team Foundation Service, which is our online version. It's a PaaS-built application. It's the core Team Foundation Server, which is the on-premises version. And so we've got that available. It's out there for preview. People really love it. It's really great to be able to set up a brand new project, no administration. I can use it as software as a service as an end user. It takes 60 seconds to set up a new project. Well, that's pretty darn cool. So I see us doing a significant amount of work around that, adding a lot of parity around those set of features in our on-premises version that we've got. And I think in general, just this notion of being able to go online, use services, develop services, and write modern applications, there's a significant amount of things that we can do that would really help people out.
And overall, how do you feel about Visual Studio?
I love Visual Studio. I'm jolly excited about Visual Studio.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so this is basically a demo version of Visual Studio, and actually anybody can pick it up if they want to play around with it, just to kind of show it to folks. One example that's really interesting to look at is the task force support. So I mentioned, basically being able to use Agile. We use Agile within the team itself. So this is basically the website that you can run in any modern browser, and it surfaces up from Team Foundation Server. The same thing is also available with the service, the online version. So with this, I can go through the product backlog, and I can basically say, had a good time at the Olympics. We're here in London, and very easily add new items into the list. And with this, one of the cool things I can do is I can actually go through and order this. So if I'm trying to figure out which pieces to go do first, I can figure out the order, just drag and drop. And now I can kind of groom my backlog and decide exactly which feature should happen when. This case, I didn't give it an effort. Let's go ahead and say this one's probably 8, and we'll go ahead and do a save and close. So this is a very easy way to manage the parts of your product that you want to go ahead and get done. If I want to take that same item, I can now drag it up into a sprint and do planning. That will make it part of the current sprint. As you can see here, in addition to that, I've got information that's telling me how well am I doing in my backlog. If I click on that, I can start seeing, well, what was my velocity, basically through each of the sprints, and what capacity do I have available. We also have the ability to go in and actually turn on forecasting. And so forecasting actually says, based on the velocity of what you've done historically, you can see the average here was 10, then I can actually see based on effort and the teams that I have assigned to it, approximately where would the lines fill in. And so I can either add new capacity by bringing on new team members, or I can decide to shuffle the backlog accordingly, but it's very straightforward for doing basically planning. If I now click on sprint 3, it'll pull me in here, and now I can actually see the stories that are here, the tasks, and who they are actually assigned to. And so it's very easy to see what that content looks like. Once again, I can see what the backlog for the sprint looks like. My demo database here, I can see how well I'm doing in my burn down for my sprint, which is very, very handy when you're doing stand-ups. And I can see how my capacity is for each person. And then finally, if I go into the board, kind of where we started, now it's very simple for me. I can look through and see what's left to do, what items are in there. So if, for example, Brian finishes this one up, I can just simply drag it over here, and I will go ahead and save it, put it into the system. This is also touch enabled, so you can see here that these big numbers on here. If I were running this on a very large touch screen, this is not a touch laptop, but if I were running on a large touch screen, using this for stand-ups, even on a wall size sort of thing, I could literally go up with a touch enable in the browser, click this, drag my hand through, and say, yeah, it looks like the effort's gone down. I should be done with this sooner than before. So this is a very quick introduction to being able to use task board, product planning, lots of cool stuff in here. So one of the other features we've added is a lot of testing support. So if I run Test Manager, we still have the ability to do planning and tracking and obviously running test cases and those sorts of things. So one of the new features that we've added, which is pretty cool, is doing exploratory testing. So if I pull up exploratory testing here, I can actually go in and say, hey, I'd just like to be able to figure things out. We do formalized testing. I can have scripts. I can actually code those up. I can run them. This is an opportunity to come in and actually say, I just want to walk around the product and try it and see if I can find a new area. So if I click Explore on this, it's now going to pull up on the left-hand side the task pane, with in this case, the exploratory testing log, and then it's going to actually allow me to go off and try whatever I want. And you'll notice that it's actually shifted the desktop over to the right-hand side. So this is more like my control panel area here, and this is the area of testing. If I go ahead and come in here, I can actually go ahead and launch this application, in this case Word. We can go ahead and kick off the portal. The one thing that's happened here is we are doing recording, but it's recording the test cases and steps, and I actually can record video. And so if I were to come in here and decide that, I don't like this orange, I can say add a screenshot, and I could come down here and say, hey, this right here. That's actually going to pull a snapshot off and put it into the log. And I can add feedback here and say, don't like the color, make it brighter, something like that. So that's actually pretty cool. And then I also have the ability, if I go through and I can start using content, clicking on individual pieces, whatever I want to do with the application like that, we can take it on here. If for some reason I've decided, that looks like a bug or it's a problem, I can actually say, let's go ahead and create a bug. And right now what you'll notice is that I've actually pulled up the bug report, and it's automatically recorded not only the screenshot observations that I made, but every step that I took, like launching Internet Explorer in the browser, actually hitting the portal, clicking on reports, clicking on those sort of work items. I can now say, reports, title, not cool enough, whatever the actual issue for a real bug. But the easy thing is, all I had to do was basically just go ahead and use the product. And the last thing that's interesting here is I can save and create test case, which means that not only can I file a bug, but I can actually turn that into a test. And what that is going to allow me to do is the next time I come back through, you'll actually be able to turn that into a test case. So if I found a real bug, test the Vital One reports. Save and close that. This will now show up as a test case with these steps inside of the test manager. And so now in the future, when I want to go back and regress it when the bug fix comes through, I'll be able to do that as well. So a bunch of cool new stuff, and I could literally spend hours, and we do have the ability to filter down how much content gets created, but you can see it's directly created, everything's nicely integrated. It's a nice little powerful system.